So everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us this evening at the Mondays at the Mess talk. William Partridge, the forgotten hero of Inchicore. Mondays at the Mess is a series of talks run by Richmond Barracks in Inchicore that celebrate the rich stories and experiences of the local community, past and present. Richmond Barracks is run by Dublin City Council Culture Company, which runs cultural initiatives and buildings across the city with and for the people of Dublin. My name is Zoe, and I'm the venue coordinator for Richmond Barracks. In a few moments, I'm going to hand you over to tonight's speaker, Fergus Whelan. But before we start, I want to let you know that there'll be time for some questions at the end of the session. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. Just a reminder that this talk is being recorded and will be shared at a later date on our channels. And if you want to be told when this is available and find out about our other projects and events, please sign up to our newsletter, and I will put this link for this in the chat box. So, without further ado, let me hand you over to Fergus. Fergus Whelan is an author and historian and works as a tour guide with the Dublin City Council Culture Company for Richmond Barracks and 14 Henrietta Street. Over to you, Fergus.
Thanks, Zoe. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk to you today about William Partridge, who was born in 1874 and died in 1917. He was a patriot, he was a poet, he was a trade unionist, and he was an Inchicore community leader and community representative, all in one. His father was an Englishman, Benjamin Partridge. Benjamin Partridge came to work in Sligo on the new railroad in 1862. The railroad had been introduced into Ireland gradually from the 1840s, and in the nature of these things, the skilled workers and the engineers required to run the railroads were imported from England, and such it was with Benjamin Partridge, William's father. William himself begins an apprenticeship as a mechanical fitter with the Midland and Great Western Railway at Sligo in 1891. But he was transferred to Broadstone in Dublin, the railway works at Broadstone, in 1887, where he joined the craft union, the Amalgamated Society of Engineers. The Amalgamated Society of Engineers would have organised railway workers all over England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then eventually, when the railway came here, in Southern Ireland also. William moved to the Inchicore works in 1899. This picture here was turned up in the research by a good friend and colleague of mine, Peter Rigney, who may well be tuning in tonight. This photograph is of a number of the skilled craftsmen of Inchicore in 1887. Now, this is a little bit before William Partridge's time there, but no doubt he would have known many of these men and they him. The great Charles Stuart Parnell, the uncrowned King of Ireland, Avondale's Broad Eagle, came to Inchicore for an election meeting one time, and he had some very nice and stirring things to say about the workforce in the Inchicore engineering works. And this is what he said: "I am pleased to address this meeting, as it is largely composed of the men of Inchicore, comprising amongst them the best mechanical and engineering talent in Ireland. The men of Inchicore can turn out work in the engineering workshops of Inchicore, unequalled by the work of artisans anywhere in the world. The locomotives, the railway carriages, the wagons they produce are excelled by no others, and they are an example of what Irishmen can do in these great industrial pursuits, if only given the opportunity." So praise indeed there from the young crowned King of Ireland for the workers of Inchicore. Very shortly after he moved to Inchicore, Partridge joined the Gaelic League here at the Workman's Club. Any of you who are from the neighbourhood will be very familiar with this building, I'm sure. We all know that the National Revolution, in the 1916 rebellion, the War of Independence that followed and so on, to some extent were driven by a cultural revolution that came a little bit earlier. The end of the 19th century, you have the Gaelic Athletic Association, you have the Gaelic League, you have the formation of the Abbey Theatre and so on. So William Partridge is in this cultural revolution almost from the very beginning, where he joins the Gaelic League and learns Irish here in the Workmen's Club in 1901. Now, in 1896, there had been a lockout in Scotland of engineering and railway workers in Scotland, the north of England, and in Belfast. And why were they locked out? They were locked out for demanding an 8-hour day, a 48-hour week. Now, just think about that. Those of us who are used to a 40-hour week and some even a 35-hour week, these people were locked out of their employment because they were looking for an 8-hour day, 5-day week. Partridge worked very hard raising support amongst workers in Dublin for his beleaguered colleagues in Scotland, the north of England, and in Belfast. He became very well, as a result of this work, he became very well known in trade union circles in Britain. His reputation in Britain is very important later when he becomes Jim Larkin and Jim Connolly's envoy to the British Trade Union Congress during the Great Dublin Lockout of 1913. But before that, 1902, there's a major strike at the Inchicore Works itself. Partridge is elected secretary of the strike committee. This is strange in a way, because he opposed the strike. Partridge knew that if this strike started, it was going to last, and that the hardship would fall, as usual in these situations, on the women and the children. He therefore spoke against the strike and he voted against the strike, but he went along with the majority who voted for strike action, and he becomes a strike leader. The strike goes on for 6 months. The employers bring in imported strike breakers from Scotland and in England in very large numbers, and they build accommodation, special accommodation for the strike breakers within the boundaries of the works, because they know well that there'll be no welcome for these strike breakers in the surrounding area. And in fact, on a number of occasions, strike breakers from Scotland and the north of England are attacked. On one occasion outside Cleary's pub on Emmett Road, several locals get 6 months in Mountjoy as a result of these attacks. This particular story amuses me. Maybe it shouldn't amuse me, but I can't help myself. On one occasion, a group of strikers were trying to throw a strike breaker from the upper deck of a tram on Emmett Road. The conductor, seeing what was happened, ran upstairs, but he didn't run up to protect the strike breaker. He ran up to help the strikers throw him over the top of the tram, and would have spent a bit of time in jail himself had not the case against him been dropped due to lack of evidence. In 1904, Partridge is elected to Dublin Corporation for the Inchicore area. He becomes very active and very successful when fighting for decent houses for the people of Inchicore. One of the big problems for working people at this time in Dublin was the appalling living conditions that people had in the tenements, with decaying tenement buildings with no running water, no proper sanitation, and so on. And it was a hard problem to solve in most of Dublin, because these tenement buildings, decayed as they were privately owned by slum landlords, many of whom were on Dublin Corporation. So it was hard to, even if there was a will in Dublin Corporation to knock down the tenements and sort of engage in some urban renewal, it was very difficult to do that. Inchicore was more fortunate, as it were, because there was a lot of land available in Inchicore. Specifically, the Oblit Fathers had a lot of land, which Partridge encouraged him and succeeded in getting the corporation to acquire that land and to agree to build houses for the working classes. Even then, it was a very stratified society. The corporation intended to have A, B, and C class houses. The A class houses would be for the skilled craftsmen, the high earners who would be in a position to pay a high rent. The class B would be for the middle ranking workers, and of course the class C would be for the unskilled labourers at the bottom of the heap, as it were, people who couldn't afford a very substantial rent. It was intended that those houses would not have washing facilities, would not have sanitation facilities. They would be third-class houses, as it were. Partridge was having none of it, and he insisted that all the houses, A, B, and C, have proper sanitation, washing facilities, etc. It was very hard for a working man to be on Dublin Corporation in 1904. There was no wage paid to councillors, and the meetings took place during the working day. That meant that the corporation was dominated by slum landlords on one hand and publicans on the other. In fact, the big publican lobby on Dublin Corporation at the time were known as the Whiskey Lobby. But working people couldn't really be on the corporation unless they could get time off work and the cooperation of their employer. And initially, the Inchicore Works were happy to facilitate William Partridge in this, because they knew it was in their interests that their workforce had decent housing. So if the corporation were prepared to produce decent housing, well then the employers were happy with that. And so they helped Partridge in a way in his corporation, serving on the corporation, but only for a time. Eventually, when they realised that Partridge was a strong fighter on behalf of workers in Dublin City more generally, they withdrew that the permission for him to have time off work, and he had to resign from the corporation, even though he'd been a very, very effective city councillor. He had joined Arthur Griffith's Sinn Féin party. Arthur Griffith had started the Sinn Féin party in 1905, and Partridge quickly became a very active member of that party. But he broke with Arthur Griffith in 1909 because a certain Liverpool man, the great big Jim Larkin, came to Dublin to organise the unskilled workers, and Griffith was very, very much opposed to Larkin in particular, and to trade unions in general. And as a result, William Partridge broke with Griffith and actually became, as it were, a sort of a lieutenant, a sidekick, or a helper to big Jim Larkin himself. In 1912, he loses his job. Partridge is sacked out of the Inchicore Works. For what? He's sacked because he complains publicly that the Great Southern and Western Railway have been engaged in a sectarian promotion campaign. In other words, they were promoting Protestants with less service, less experience, less skill. They were promoting them over the heads of more experienced Roman Catholics. When Partridge pointed this out, he was sacked for his troubles. Incidentally, I should have said Partridge himself was reared a Protestant. In those days, pre-Nate Temerate days, when a Catholic married a Protestant, usually the way they handled the question was the fathers, the sons would have the religion of the father, and the girls would have the religion of the mother. Nate Temerate put a stop to that. Nonetheless, Partridge is reared as a Protestant until he's about 14 years of age, when he decides himself to convert to Roman Catholicism and becomes actually quite a pious Roman Catholic after that. So he, anyway, he's sacked out of the Inchicore Works for opposing the sectarian promotion regime, but he's not out of work for long, because he becomes a full-time paid official with Larkin's Irish Transport and General Workers Union in October 1912. That unprepossessing building there that you're looking at, I should have said earlier, that's the EMMET Hall in Inchicore. That was bought by Jim Larkin in 1912, and it became the Inchicore branch of the Irish Transport and General Workers Union. And while William Partridge lived there for a while. No, he didn't live there, sorry, he worked there for a while. He was working alongside, he was the office manager. The other official who worked there with him was Michael Mallon, who we'll talk about in a little while. So he's working for Larkin from 1912. Then in 1913, in August 1913, the Great Dublin Lockout happens, where 400 employers lock out 28,000 unskilled workers. Basically, they're given a choice: either they leave Larkin's union, or they can go home from work. So they're locked out. And in the words of the song, 8 months we fought, 8 months we starved. We stood by Larkin through thick and thin, but foodless homes and crying children, they broke our hearts and we couldn't win. From the very beginning, Partridge is a leader, a major leader in the lockout. This is a quote: "He matched Larkin for oratorical fire at the nightly lockout rallies in Beresford Place." Now that's indeed praise, because Jim Larkin was the great orator of his generation, and we're told here that Partridge matched him for oratorical fire. Twice during the first week of the lockout, Partridge is arrested and released on bail. In fact, Partridge claimed, with some justification, that he actually engaged in the first action of the lockout. The first tram to be stopped. The lockout started with stopping the trams in Dublin. The first tram was stopped by William Partridge in August 1913 on Emmet Road. He is sent, because of, I said earlier on, he was very well known in England, in the British trade union movement. So he's sent to England by Connolly and Larkin by a piece of serendipity. On the 2nd of September 1913, the British Trade Union Conference has been held in Manchester, and he's able to go there and describe the terrible violence that had happened on the streets of Dublin on the previous Sunday, which became known as Bloody Sunday, when the drunken RIC and the Dublin Metropolitan Policemen attacked the crowds in O'Connell Street. He charged at the Trade Union Conference, he says that the police were fueled by drink in their tuggery on that day in O'Connell Street, and that's picked up by the British newspapers, and in fact even the European newspapers. So you could say Partridge is responsible for getting out to the world the news of what's happening to the working classes in Dublin. But we often know, or people who've read about or thought about the lockout know very well about that violence in O'Connell Street on Bloody Sunday. But a lot of people don't realise there was terrible violence in Inchicore also. As I say, he had stopped the first tram on the morning of the 26th of April on Emmet Road. However, the company, the headquarters of the United Tramway Company was at the top of Emmet Road, and the company tried, almost as a provocation, they would run trams with strike breakers down the Emmet Road. There wouldn't be passengers on the tram, there'd be policemen on the tram, and obviously in these situations, the strikers were attacking the trams, and this caused a number of incidents that eventually turned into a riot. There was a public meeting on Emmet Road on the 30th of August, and when things started to look ugly, Partridge asked the women and the children to go home and said that the men would stay and they would deal with the police themselves. And they must have done a good job of dealing with the police, because the police retreated. They retreated all the way up to Richmond Barracks, and they pleaded there for the help of the West Kent regiment that was stationed in the barracks at the time. So the police and the West Kents then came down and counterattacked the workers down along the Emmet Road. There was fighting up and down the road, and the soldiers and police broke into the local people's houses, smashed the furniture, and so on. And in fact, one man, a fellow councillor of William Partridge, a fellow called Patrick Carroll, was battened that night, never regained consciousness, and died from his injuries a month later. Partridge was a poet, an accomplished poet, and his poems were published not only in the Labour press, but in the mainstream press also. And he wrote a poem about the lockout, which I'll share with you now. They will not let my daddy work, that's what my mammy said. Then how am I to get my milk and mammy get the bread? Must I in vain with hunger cry and famished too with coals? Is it with little children's tears that rich men make their goals? Yes, that he is shut out from work. Next week there is no rent, and all because false knaves exist and tyrants won't repent. I wonder if the Saviour died for men or boss as they, who mock the sacrifice God made by actions every day. But there are men in Ireland who still dare defend the weak, who heed not taunt, nor sneer, nor frown, and tremble not to speak, and who, despite the lying press, will uphold the right, and yet undaunted by big odds, will carry on the fight. So that was published in Larkin's paper during the lockout, and I think it gives you some idea that I'm not a student of English literature, and I don't know much about poetry, but it strikes me that that's a fairly competent piece of agitprop anyway, if not poetry. The violence against the workers in the lockout convinced Jim Larkin and James Connolly to start a workers' militia called the Irish Citizen Army to defend the workers from attack. So what have I done there? Partridge becomes a captain in the Citizen Army. Emmet Hall, that we saw earlier on Inchicore Road, he drills in Emmet Hall under Michael Mallon. Citizen Army were quite fortunate to have Michael Mallon. Michael Mallon was a socialist and a trade unionist, but before that he'd been a career soldier, and a good soldier. In the run-up to the 1916 Rising, when the Citizen Army and the volunteers were going on joint exercises and so on, they sometimes had competitions, either drill competitions, shooting competitions, and so on. Almost invariably, the Citizen Army were superior in these competitions to the volunteers, mostly because of the professional training they got many of them in Emmet Hall under Michael Mallon. In the run-up to the 1916 Rising, the volunteers, Padraig Pearson Company, Tom Clark, they were very much afraid that James Connolly was going to go off on a solo run and have a rising of his own. So they kidnapped Connolly, and they brought him to a meeting, and they told him their plans for a rising. They asked him to hold off and go jointly with them, but they also told him that they had a plan to bring guns in from Germany, and that Roger Casement was at that point in Germany negotiating an arms shipment. So Connolly sent Partridge down to Kerry to meet Casement, because the previous year Partridge had been down in Kerry on behalf of Jim Larkin, organising the railway workers. So the railway workers down there knew Partridge, and Connolly believed that had the arms landed, Partridge would have been able to use his excellent contacts on the railways to make sure those weapons got to Dublin and the other places they needed to be in time for the rising. Alas, we know that when Partridge got to Kerry, Casement had already been arrested, and the ship with the rifles had been scuttled by the captain. So Partridge had no option but to come back and report the bad news to James Connolly. However, in the rebellion, he decides to take his place alongside his friends, Michael Mallon and Countess Markievicz, in the College of Surgeons. Now, he was a captain by rank, but by this stage, he was feeling very, very ill, and he didn't feel well enough to carry out a captain's duty. So he forsook his rank and fought as an ordinary soldier at the College of Surgeons. When Margaret Skinner, the famous, well, to some of us famous anyway, the young woman who'd come over from Scotland to take part in the Rising, she was a very effective sniper. But she was badly wounded in the course of the fighting and was rescued by Partridge. But the last time Partridge saw her, she was so badly wounded, he believed that she had not survived. And when he was taken to Richmond Barracks after the Rising, he told his colleagues there that Skinner was dead. They didn't realise that she had actually survived. She was in Vincent's Hospital at the time, and she survived and lived a very long life, being a very successful teacher and so on, right up until the 1950s, if not the 1960s. And by the way, I think Mary McAuliffe has recently brought out a book about Margaret Skinner, which I haven't had the pleasure of reading yet, but it's certainly something on my to-do list. So after the Rising, although there was only 1,500 people involved in the Rising, the British managed to gather up 3,000 plus prisoners in Richmond Barracks, and they gathered them up from all over the country. So it's not only people who were actively involved in the Rising, but anybody the British thought might have liked to have been involved in the Rising ends up in Richmond Barracks. Many of them are court-martialed. There's 90 death sentences handed out in Richmond Barracks, 89 to men, and Countess Markievicz is sentenced to death also. But Partridge, because he'd fought as an ordinary soldier, he's court-martialed as an ordinary soldier, he gets 10 years penal servitude. Mallon and Markievicz are sentenced to death. Mallon said that Partridge was more than a brother at Richmond Barracks and that he was a great comfort to all of his fellow prisoners. That was some thing to be able to say, given that we know that Partridge was quite ill at this time. After the court-martial, the condemned were marched down to Kilmainham jail. In Mallon's case, this involved him marching past the EMMET Hall, which was his family home, and his pregnant wife, is looking out the window as he marches past their family home on his way to his death. It's said that the family dog managed to get out and follow his master down to the gates of Kilmainham. As I say, Mallon's wife was pregnant at the time. The baby was born a little bit late, as in Mr. Rising, but that baby lived to be over 100 years of it and lived long enough to help us celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 1916 Rising. Partridge is sent to Dartmoor and Lewes jails in England before, but he's very ill, and his condition continues to deteriorate. So eventually he's released. When he's released in England, he's so ill at that point that he has to spend some time in a nursing home in England before he's even well enough to travel home to die. He goes back to his native Ballinadreen, to his brother's house in his native Ballinadreen when he comes back from England. And there he dies. His funeral is used. It's only 1917, remember, October 1917. It's very shortly after the Rising, but it's used as a massive show of strength by the rebels to show that they're very far from beaten. The Countess herself leads the funeral procession, dressed in Michael Mallon's Citizen Army tunic. Also there, having travelled down from Dublin, is the Dublin Council Trade Unions, the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, the Irish Citizen Army, the East Mayo Volunteers, and the local company of volunteers. So this is really, his funeral is more than just a funeral. It is a huge statement, and it's a huge show of force to the British authorities that the rising might have ended, but the rebellion isn't over. A volley of shots is fired. So it's just one weapon used. It's fired by the Countess herself using her own short arm. She fires a volley of shots over William Partridge's grave. All of the information I've shared with you tonight, I got from this book up on the top left corner there, William Partridge, his times, 1874-1970. That was written by the great Hugh Gertie, great pal of mine, colleague of mine. We worked together in the Irish Congress of Trade Unions for many years. And before he worked there, he worked himself in the Inchicore works, which is probably what sparked his interest in Partridge in the first place. The little seat there under Hugh Gertie's photograph, that's a memorial seat that was put up by his trade union colleagues in the Inchicore works, and it's still there today. And you can see the inscription at the bottom of it says, Toki Givna Hugh Gertie A. McGarretig, Rooney and Card coming the kid, chorus on per Aaron. So Sheely August Card coming up. That basically means in memory of Hugh Gertie, the secretary of the CIE group of unions, socialist and trade unionist. So that concludes my brief introduction to Inchicore's forgotten hero. As Sophie was saying, we happily take questions now if there are any, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you so much, Fergus, for a really interesting lecture, really well illustrated. I posted in the chat box there some of the books that you mentioned, the Margaret Skinner book, and of course, the book by your friend Hugh Gertie on William Patrick Partridge, which seems to be out of print, but you should be able to order copies from your local library when they can reopen. So if anyone has any questions for Fergus, if you post them in the Q&A box, and I will start reading some of the questions that we've had already come in here. Donald Denham asks, Fergus, are there any photo records of the funeral that you mentioned?
In Hugh Gertie's book, in this book, there is one photograph of his tri-colour covered coffin with a small group of people. What there doesn't seem to be, at least I haven't seen, any photographs of the serried ranks of Citizen Army and the Dublin Council of Trade Unions. I haven't seen them. They may exist. I don't know.
Okay. There's a question here from Christina. She says, in his house, did he have family? Was it a big house? Yes,
he was married twice. I didn't really go into his personal life much in this. He married a woman who died within a year of, he married her in Dublin, and she was dead within a year of the marriage. And he had one daughter. That daughter was reared by the maternal grandparents. And he later married again around 1914. But honestly, I'm not sure the details of who he married, and I'm not sure the details of his children. I was trying to look that up before the presentation, but unfortunately, I didn't get around to it. So sorry about that.
Fair enough. There is a question here from Phil Flood. Was Partridge Terrace in the bungalow where the former Oblake grounds were named for William Partridge? If so, in what year and how did it come about?
I don't know the answer to any of those questions. I'm terribly sorry.
And Fergus, just out of interest, is it 175th anniversary of the Inchicore works this year?
I'm not sure. Again, I don't know when the Inchicore work started, but it would have presumably, it was certainly up and running in 1887. There may actually be some people listening in who might be better qualified to tell you that.
Someone had mentioned that to me last year, and I was just looking up the 150th anniversary was in 1996. I just wondered, I would have been interested to know what kind of, I suppose he would have been a contentious figure for his work in the labour movement. So I just wondered what kind of events that they would have had planned, but I'm sure it was something they were planning years in advance, and maybe they'll do something online this year like we do.
Well, I wouldn't think the people in the Inchicore works. I mean, remember they did sack him. Although, mind you, that was when it was a privately owned company, and it's been owned by CIE. And as you can see by the Hugh Geraghty memorial seat there in Inchicore Works, the CIE employers are very union-friendly employers.
Well, that's all the questions we have for the moment. If anyone else has any questions that they would like to, any burning questions they would like to ask Fergus before we finish the session, please go ahead. Well, I think that's everything, Fergus. Thank you very much. Oh, someone's actually just posted in the chat. Let me see this here. He had 4 children from his second wife, 1 son and 3 daughters, all now deceased. His daughter Constance was my mother.
Oh, very good.
And that's posted in the chat. So thanks for sharing that. From Macaulay, I'm not sure what your first name is, but you're signed in as Macaulay. Thank you for sharing that. And something else has just come in on the Q&A. From Kira Roach Power, she says, thanks Fergus, my family Powers grew up in Bluebell and my granddad Arthur Power was involved in 1916, Con Colbert's battalion, but I never heard about William Partridge. Granddad on the other side was a tram driver. So not really a question, but...
yeah, well, one of the, Con Colbert was in the volunteers, right? And Con Colbert was in charge of the Marylebone Lane distillery. They were part under Eamon Cant. They were, you know, the 4th Battalion of the volunteers were involved around James Street, Mount Brown, and so Con Colbert was in charge there. And in fact, my granny was in Marylebone Lane distillery along with Con Colbert that time. But you see, Partridge was in the Irish Citizen Army. That's why he didn't fight in Inchicore. He fought with the Citizen Army garrison in the College of Surgeons.
Just unmute myself there. Some positive feedback here for you, Fergus. Thanks, Sheila and John. Thanking you very much for the talk. We have another question from Shay Cody. Hi, Fergus. Thanks for the interesting talk. When Partridge returned from prison, he was called to Harry Boland's house in Marino to tell the family about prison conditions.
Yes, well, hello, Shay. Nice to hear from you. Yeah, one of the things that's remarkable is that when he comes back to Ireland, he is very ill indeed. He's at death's door, but still he makes a big effort at a campaign about the prison conditions, about the terrible prison conditions that he believed was killing more than him. There were a lot of people suffering terribly in English prison. So he did. The last political acts of his life really were about trying to do something about the terrible prison conditions.
And you mentioned to me, Fergus, just when we were chatting before the talk started, that he's buried in Ballahadreen in Mayo. Yeah. Mayo / Roscommon, depending.
Yeah. Well, I think it used to be in Roscommon, or no, it is in Roscommon. It used to be in Mayo, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a bit disputed. Yeah, I'm from Sligo myself. My dad's from Ballahadreen, but he's from Mayo.
Yeah.
Roscommon. So
yeah.
Next time I'm there, I'm interested.
I know a fella who's from Ballahadreen too, and he shouts for Mayo in the football.
Yeah, exactly. Same story here. So
he's often disappointed
in our house. Brilliant. Well, I think There's just a thank you here from Mary Maxwell. Thank you very much, Mary. That's all the questions that have come in this evening, Fergus. So from all of us here at Dublin City Council Culture Company, thank you everyone for joining us. And if you want to find out more about our upcoming events and lectures, you can visit our website, richmondbarracks.ie, where you can also sign up for the newsletter. So have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fergus.